My sworn rival had gone bankrupt, drowning in debt so deep he might as well pay it back with his body. So I bought him. And no matter how sharp that mouth of his was, it was still soft when I kissed him. I fed him well, clothed him in luxury, cherished him like he was something precious. Then, when he rose from the ashes, rebuilt his empire, I swallowed my reluctance and smiled as if I were happy for him. One last time. A breakup fuck. He stared at me, expression unreadable. I never said I was leaving you. I had heard the rumors long before I saw him in the flesh. Patrick was bankrupt, his debts piling up like an avalanche, suffocating him. But seeing him now, standing before me, tray in hand, made it real. His fitted uniform traced the sharp angles of his body as he leaned down, offering the drink with the same grace he once carried in boardrooms. "Sir, your drink." The social scene had always been ruthless. Those who once flattered him now sneered, reveling in the fall of a former golden boy. As Patrick turned to leave, a hand shot out and seized his wrist. "Patrick, long time no see. What are you doing playing waiter now?" I recognized the speaker. A depraved bastard, indiscriminate in his tastes. His thumb traced the delicate bone of Patrick's wrist, a slow, lecherous caress. "Heard debt collectors came knocking at your door? Must be tough, huh?" Patrick stepped back, slipping free of Danny's grasp. "Sir, please show some respect." Danny let out a sharp laugh. "Still pretending even now?" Spreading his legs wide, he lounged back in his chair. "Tell you what, keep me entertained tonight, and I'll clear your debt. How about it?" The crowd erupted in jeering laughter. "3 million? Patrick's not worth half that much." "Patrick, stop acting all high and mighty. This might be your only chance." Someone shoved him from behind, pushing him further into the spotlight. I sat back, legs crossed, plucking a grape from the hands of my companion, enjoying the show. The overhead light cast sharp shadows across Patrick's face. His expression remained eerily neutral. "Let go." Danny scoffed and, with a flick of his wrist, appended a glass of wine over Patrick's head. "Still think you're somebody? Just because I called you Patrick, you thought you were still that Patrick?" Laughter swelled, taunting, vicious. Then, without hesitation, Patrick tightened his grip on his own glass and shattered it against the edge of the table. The jagged remains glinted under the lights, and in one swift motion he drove it into Danny's head. Blood spilled, dark and violent. Danny crumpled to the ground, writhing in pain, crimson pooling beneath him. Patrick didn't move, his chest rising and falling with measured breaths, expression blank. I chuckled and waved a hand lazily. "Patrick, making a mess in my place, isn't that a bit much?" Security stormed forward. A swift kick to the back of his knees, and Patrick dropped. I rose from my seat, crouching beside him, fingers tilting his chin up for a closer look. Red wine streaked his pale skin, a striking contrast. Undeniably beautiful. Patrick's brows furrowed as he jerked away, disgust flashing in his eyes. "Don't touch me." I wasn't offended. Patting his shoulder, I pulled him up with ease. "Don't be so tense. Debts must be paid one way or another." I nodded toward Danny, still groaning on the floor. "You don't want to go with him? Fine. Come with me instead." A simple, unmistakable warning. Patrick's fingers curled into fists at his sides. He stood there, silent, until his head dipped slightly, surrendering. "Donald, can you lend me some money?" His voice was hoarse, almost desperate. "I'll pay you back soon." I arched a brow. The plea in his eyes was painfully clear. It must have shattered his pride to even ask. What a shame. After all, I was the one who orchestrated his downfall. Why would I save him? I stood up, flicking the wine from my fingertips onto a napkin. He said no. "Do as you please, gentlemen." In my mind, I counted down. 3, 2, 1. Wait. A tight grip latched onto my wrist. "I'll go with you." I smiled. No one understood Patrick better than I did. Proud, but he knew when to bow his head. My companion, oblivious to the shift in the air, hesitated. "Donald, what about me?" I was in a good mood. My tone was unusually gentle. "I'll wire the breakup fee to your account." Patrick leaned against the car window, his voice steady. "Donald, don't let me catch you slipping." I hummed, neither agreeing nor denying, lifting his hand to press a kiss against his skin. His body tensed, still unaccustomed to the new dynamic between us. I had never been particularly interested in men. I had everything I needed, no desire for anything more. But Patrick was different. Capable. Beautiful. The kind of excellence that made people hate him. For 22 years, I was nothing more than a bastard child, kept in the shadows, unacknowledged. The one chance I had at stepping into the light, stolen by Patrick, effortlessly. Back then he barely even looked at me. Just a fleeting glance before his attention drifted elsewhere. A bastard like you? You think you can compete with me? Years of effort, crushed in an instant. 5 more years of clawing my way up from nothing. The sound of running water filled the silence. Patrick had been in the shower for a while now. I didn't mind. Let him take his time preparing himself. When the door finally opened, steam billowed out, curling against the cold air. He stepped out, wrapped in nothing but a towel. I let my gaze sweep over him, taking my time. Why years of effort collapsed in an instant, and I had to endure 5 more years to climb my way back up. Patrick was still in the shower. He took his time, but I let him. Gave him space to prepare himself. When the bathroom door finally swung open, steam curled into the cool air, and he stepped out, a towel slung low around his hips. I let my gaze roam over him. Lean, well-defined legs. A sharp V-line tapering into his waist. A body that had matured into something undeniably striking. No matter how I looked at it, I wasn't losing out on this deal. Patrick met my stare head-on, not moving an inch. I tilted my chin. Put that on. I tossed the outfit onto the bed. Delicate, sheer fabric held together by a few thin strings. I had picked it out while shopping with a woman I used to date. The moment I saw it, I thought, this would look good on him. Patrick's eyelashes fluttered. He seemed to swallow back a wave of humiliation. Is this necessary? I nodded. He exhaled slowly, fingers tightening around the fabric, before turning toward the bathroom again. Patrick was beautiful. Everywhere. I closed my eyes briefly, steadying my breath. For a second, I was tempted to reach for my phone, capture this moment. But I knew him too well, he'd tear me apart if I did. I'm done. His voice pulled me back. Patrick stood beneath the light, the outfit fitting even better than I had imagined. The thin black straps dug into the soft flesh of his thighs. His legs trembled slightly. A sight designed to unravel people. His face burned red, whether out of shame or fury, I wasn't sure. I walked over, palm resting flat against his abdomen. Fingers tangled into his hair, pulling him down into a kiss. Patrick wasn't one for theatrics. Once he realized there was no escaping, he leaned into it, returning the kiss with the same sharpness he once used against me in business. The same mouth that had never yielded in negotiations, soft now, pliant against mine. A sharp rip split the air. The fragile fabric tore under my hands. Patrick's eyes flew open, a mixture of shock and exasperation flashing across his face. Then why the hell did you make me put it on? I pressed a hand to his waist, lips brushing against his ear. Because unwrapping a gift is part of the fun. Patrick was like a ripened peach, ready to burst with a single touch. I felt a sudden urge to tease him further. He gritted his teeth. If you're so damn useless, just let me do it. I laughed lowly. I'm old. Beg me a little, and maybe I'll consider it. The way men had an innate need to conquer was ridiculous. But seeing Patrick beneath me, helplessly caught in this moment, filled me with a strange satisfaction. The night stretched long. When I reached for the nightstand, I found the box empty. I smiled faintly. Patrick, bear with it. By the time I was done, he barely stirred in his sleep, shifting uncomfortably as though even unconscious, he still felt the aftermath. I had gone too far. I sighed, gathering him up carefully, cleaning him, tending to the marks I'd left behind, tucking him into bed. It was his first time being on the losing side. Just as I was drifting off, a foot landed squarely against my side, kicking me straight onto the floor. Go get me something to eat. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling. Then I looked up at him, curled under the sheets, sleeping soundly like he owned the place. Did he mistake me for one of his little lovers? Still, seeing how exhausted he was, I let it slide. Dragging myself into the kitchen, I made something simple. By the time I finished, Patrick had woken up, yawning as he strolled out, bare-legged, completely unbothered. "Donald, with all your wealth, you couldn't even prepare a pair of pants for me?" He showed no sign of remembering anything from earlier. My gaze flickered to his legs, to the faint indent of teeth marks left behind. Heat crept up my ears. I turned away quickly. "Come eat." Patrick flopped onto a chair, one leg crossed over the other, biting into a steamed bun. "Wow," he mumbled around his food. "Didn't know you could cook, Donald." I scoffed. Before the Hartley family took me in, I had gone through worse. Cooking was nothing. I slid a document across the table. "Read through this. If everything looks good, sign it." Patrick glanced at the numbers, brows raising slightly. 25 grand a month? There was a pause before he casually scrawled his signature across the bottom. Too fast. I doubted he even looked at the fine print. Patrick grinned, leaning over to press a quick kiss against my cheek. "Boss, you're generous." I froze. That fleeting warmth lingered against my skin. I cleared my throat. "You'll leave when the debt is cleared. With interest, that's 6 million. Patrick nodded lazily. Got it, got it. Free food, free drinks, and a bed to sleep in. For 25 grand a month, this beats working any day. He smirked, flashing me a thumbs up. "Besides," he added with a teasing lilt, "Donald, your skills are pretty damn impressive." I had a good time. I frowned. For some reason, I felt an odd sense of being taken advantage of. Patrick laughed, rubbing the back of his neck, looking unexpectedly sheepish. But his eyes held something real. They all turned their backs on me. "But you, Donald, you're the only one who reached out. Even if there was a price." "I mean it. I'm grateful." He sounded sincere. The more I listened, the more restless I felt. I stared at him for a long moment before looking away. "Forget it." Still without pants, Patrick didn't seem to care. He stretched out on the couch, utterly at ease, like he belonged here. I pulled a pair of pants from the closet and handed them to Patrick. "I don't have your size. Just make do with these." Patrick eyed them with distaste, holding them between his fingers as if they might be contaminated. After a long moment, he sighed dramatically and slid them on. "You can't be serious, Donald. Do your women stay over and you don't even keep clothes for them?" I raised a brow. "Would you bring someone home?" He scoffed, tugging at the waistband. "Fair point." Patrick hummed lazily, clearly unimpressed. "So I'm the first? What an absolute honor." Didn't sound like he felt particularly honored. I ignored his sarcasm and reminded him, "Stay home and behave. I'm going to work." "Wait." I turned back, only for Patrick to grab my collar and pull me into a slow, lingering kiss. When he finally let go, he grinned, eyes curving mischievously. "Come home early, Donald. I'll be waiting." My head buzzed. The rest of the day suddenly felt a little lighter. Peter sprawled onto the couch in my office, making himself at home. "Donald, you went through all that trouble, collaborated with the Tovey heir, meticulously ruined Patrick's company, and in the end, it was all just so you could keep him?" Peter squinted at me like I was an unsolvable riddle. "I don't get it. You don't even like men. What's the point?" He shifted positions. "You sure you didn't just hate him so much that you circled back to loving him?" The ink on my pen had bled through the page, yet I hadn't written a single word. I did hate Patrick. But over the years, he was the only one who ever stood on equal footing with me. If he could be brought so low, if he could be used and discarded, then what did that say about me? So I answered, "It's not love." But an image flashed through my mind. Patrick, eyes red, expression wrecked. "Maybe," I admitted, "it's just because he's good looking." I smirked. "And obedient. Kinda cute too." Obedient in bed, at least. Whispering, gasping, pleading for me to slow down. Peter's expression twisted into something unreadable. "You're done for, Donald. You know what the first sign of falling for someone is? Thinking they're cute. Bullshit. One night in bed doesn't make me in love. Peter was the real romantic here. I gathered my files, stacking them neatly before packing them up. Go home. I'm heading back. Peter let out a low whistle. Not in love, huh? Normally, you'd be glued to that chair until midnight. Now you're running home at this hour? Who the hell's waiting for you? Patrick. The word home still felt strange to me. I was just one of my father's many illegitimate children. My mother had lived her whole life as an honest woman, until she made one reckless mistake, getting pregnant with me. That one mistake ruined her. A few years after giving birth, she was gone. My father never liked me. A bastard child was nothing unusual in our circles, but it was still a blemish. An unwanted reminder. So when I pushed open the door and saw Patrick sprawled on my couch, eating ice cream, watching TV, I hesitated. For the first time, the house didn't feel empty. Patrick looked up lazily, then put down the ice cream to walk over and wrap his arms around my neck. Tough day at work, boss? He seemed to be settling into his role as a kept man just fine. I grabbed him by the ass to keep him from slipping. What? Need something from me? He stretched out a hand, completely shameless. Boss, I'm planning to start a business. Advance me some of my salary. I almost laughed. You do realize I'm your boss. What kind of kept man straight up asks for money? When I refused, Patrick pouted, then wriggled onto my lap, grinding against me as he kissed my jaw. Come on, pretty please. He hesitated, looking pained. Then he clenched his teeth. Fine. 50-50 split on the profits. I didn't react. Patrick hesitated, then reluctantly amended, 60-40. You take 60. I wasn't irritated because of the money. 6 million wasn't a huge amount to someone like Patrick. But the fact that he was so eager to get away, it gnawed at me. Something about it didn't sit right. Forget it, he sighed, rubbing his head. Let's just eat. It's only a matter of time, anyway. I raised a brow at the blackened, unidentifiable mess on the table. You made this? Patrick nodded eagerly, seeking praise. The kid I used to take care of liked messing around in the kitchen, so I figured I should try too. Gotta be a good canary, right? I caught onto a key word. Your house or his? Patrick blinked, confused. His, obviously. A beat passed. Then he suddenly smirked, eyes glinting as he leaned in. Boss, are you jealous? I looked away, landing on the back of his hand. No. Patrick was terrible at cooking. His hands were peppered with small burns and oil splatters, ones he clearly tried to hide. I picked up my chopsticks and shoved a bite into his mouth. Try it yourself. Patrick chewed quickly, swallowed, then forced a bright smile. Delicious. Liar. If it's so good, then finish the whole thing. Ah. Patrick's face fell. He poked at his plate for a moment, then looked up at me. Then what are you eating? Rolling up my sleeves, I tied on an apron and pulled ingredients from the fridge. I'll make noodles. Technically, I had a housekeeper. But given the whole kept man situation wasn't exactly respectable, I had dismissed her yesterday. Patrick hugged me from behind, pressing his face against my back. Donald, I'm starving. I stilled. Then starve. But in the end, I still fed him. He practically teared up, dramatic as ever. Donald, you're such a good man, he sniffled. I sighed. Eat your food. Just a little slip of the hand, he muttered as he added an extra pinch of seasoning. A good man? I turned those words over in my mind, tasting them. If Patrick ever found out that I was the one who bankrupted his company, stripped him of everything he had built with his own 2 hands, would he still say the same? I swallowed my food before finally speaking. I've already wired 6 months of your salary to your account. I only have one request, you need to be home when I get back. Patrick nodded easily. No problem. I ruffled his hair, not too hard, not too soft. He yelped dramatically, rubbing his head before stretching out a hand. You broke my brain. Pay up. Ignoring him, I grabbed his hand instead and started applying medicine. I pressed deliberately against his injuries. Sure enough, he whined, Donald, be gentle. This wasn't keeping a canary. This was raising a pampered little prince. I sighed but softened my touch anyway. When I was cleaning up, Patrick suddenly pulled me into a tight embrace. A kiss landed on my lips, his voice warm with genuine emotion. "Donald, I really am grateful to you." Maybe he truly was. Because that night, Patrick was unusually enthusiastic. But I wasn't in the mood. It felt like our entire relationship was held together by nothing more than money. I pulled the blanket over him and patted his head. "Go to sleep." Patrick stared at me for a few seconds before yanking the blanket down. "Seriously, Donald? You're 27 and you're already..." I hummed, completely unbothered by his provocation. "Told you. I'm old." Patrick attempted to strip me, but I smacked him on the ass a few times, and he finally settled down. He grumbled, rolling away. Fine. You do your health maintenance." Not even a minute later, he burrowed back into my arms. "Good night, Donald." Patrick was busy. Busier than I had expected. He was often out of the house, disappearing from the security cameras entirely. But just as he promised, he was always home before I returned. Sometimes if I got back late, I would find him passed out on the couch. The moment he heard the door, he'd stir, groggy, rubbing at his eyes. Then, with his half-asleep days, he'd wrap his legs around my waist like a damn koala. "Donald, you're late." He would try to stay awake, babbling about his day, until finally, he'd bite down on my shoulder hard enough to leave a mark. "Next time, don't be so late." It was hard to describe what I felt in those moments. Something so beautiful it almost didn't seem real. Like an illusion, something that could shatter at the slightest touch. Then one night, I came home earlier than usual. Patrick wasn't there. I waited. And waited. Finally, the front door creaked open, and Patrick peeked his head inside, looking around like a thief. He let out a sigh of relief and muttered to himself, "He's not home yet." "What are you doing?" The lights in the living room flickered on. Patrick blinked at me. Then, as if trying to prove his innocence, he held out his hands. Inside them, a tiny kitten. "Boss, can I keep it?" I frowned. Furry creatures were a hassle. "No." I grabbed both the kitten and Patrick's collar, ready to toss them both out. Patrick quickly pulled my hand to his cheek, rubbing against it like a spoiled child. "But it's dying, Donald. It's freezing out there. You wouldn't be that heartless, would you?" The kitten, as if understanding the plea, also nuzzled against my palm. I stared at Patrick for a long moment before asking, "Do you think that just because you act cute, I'll give you whatever you want?" Patrick blinked. Then, with the most serious expression, he nodded. "Yes. You always give me what I want." I was speechless. Patrick was a spoiled young master through and through. Completely used to being taken care of. In the end, we kept the cat. Patrick named it Pat. He lit a cigarette and accused me of using public office for personal gain. For a fleeting second, I had the illusion of something domestic. Wife, child, warm home. And it terrified me. The warmer things got, the more uneasy I became. Patrick flicked the ashes into an ashtray and spoke casually, "Boss, I have a business dinner tomorrow night. I'll be home late." I nodded, ignoring the tight feeling in my chest. I was being ridiculous. This was supposed to be about revenge, but now I was the one afraid of being found out. Screw it. I pulled Patrick into my arms. If I got caught, then I got caught. As long as he didn't leave me, that was enough. Patrick wasn't home. But his phone had a tracker. Pat rubbed against my leg, meowing. I scratched his head. "Wait here. I'll go get your dad back." Patrick was probably negotiating a deal. I parked outside the restaurant and waited. Through the glass windows, I saw him downing one drink after another. His Adam's apple bobbed with each gulp, the liquor staining his collar. It was absurd. Obscene. A bloated, middle-aged man tilted Patrick's chin up, the warm lighting making Patrick's flushed face stand out even more. His eyes held something that looked like shame. "Come on, Patrick. We all know how capable you are. Just drink this and the deal is yours." A smirk. "Donald's crazy to let someone like you out of his hands." Patrick lifted his glass, but before he could drink, the man caught his wrist, pulling him in. "The toast." Let's drink together. I already knew what would happen next. My hands clenched around the steering wheel. I forced myself to look away, to stop myself from storming in and smashing that glass over the man's head. Patrick wouldn't want me to see this. The man who once dominated boardrooms, unshakable, was now groveling for a deal. The contrast was unbearable. So I pretended not to see. I waited for Patrick at home. For a long time. By the time the clock hit midnight, he finally stumbled through the door, drunk out of his mind. He squinted at me for a few seconds, blinking as if trying to focus. Then, with a goofy grin, he waved a freshly signed contract in the air like a trophy. Wife, look, I made money for us. He could barely walk straight before he collapsed into my arms. I ran my fingers through his hair, feeling an ache in my chest. I wanted to tell him he didn't need to do this. That he didn't need to pay off the debt. That I could take care of him. Patrick hugged my neck, rubbing against me like a lazy cat. You just stay at home and be my good little housewife, okay? Your sugar daddy's got this. He leaned in closer, voice soft in my ear. Love you, Shaosher. My fingers froze. A heavy weight settled on my chest, suffocating me. Whatever warmth had crept into my expression instantly disappeared. I had already done a full background check on Patrick. Nothing came up. I had no idea who this Shaosher was. And I wasn't even sure if the wife he was calling was me. I had dug through every relationship he ever had, ex-girlfriends, ex-boyfriends. None of them had a name that even remotely sounded like Sure. The only person close to it was Matt, the Tovi heir. The same man I had partnered with to take Patrick down. But that was impossible. Patrick and Matt hated each other. The same way Patrick and I used to. But the same way we used to? I stared at Matt's file, fingers tightening around the paper. Compared to me and Patrick, their history was closer. Technically speaking, Matt was even his younger brother. Peter sighed beside me. Donald, you're acting like some lovesick teenage girl. This jealous streak is embarrassing. I didn't argue. Which, honestly, was already an admission. Peter propped his chin on his hand, watching me. So, have you thought about how you're gonna explain everything to Patrick? I looked up. Explain what? You know, everything you did to? He's never going to find out. Patrick was shameless. Even when he was out sealing business deals, he still found time to harass me. Donald, let me see your chest. I responded with a simple, a moment of silence. Then, a dramatic crying emoji, followed by a long rant. Donald, you old bastard. You weren't shy when you were biting my chest in bed. Now suddenly you want to act like a saint. You even asked if I had milk, but now I can't even look? I hate you. My temple twitched. I flipped my phone face down, rubbing at my forehead. My fingers, almost involuntarily, unbuttoned my cuff. Had I really said that? I hesitated for a long time before snapping a quick photo, too quick to even look at properly, then sent it over. Patrick immediately perked up. Milf dad, let me suck. I swallowed down my mortification. Come home early. Then after a pause I added, don't drink too much. I didn't want to hear another name from his lips again. I glanced at the mirror, staring at my reflection for a long time. My eyes inevitably drifted downward. It was kind of big. The office door suddenly burst open. Matt stormed in, his face thunderous. My assistant trailed behind him, looking pale. Sir, I tried to stop him. I waved a hand, dismissing them. The moment the door shut, Matt exploded. Donald, have you completely lost your fucking mind? You're funding Patrick just so he can use the money to come after me? He scoffed. Even for you, that's a level of betrayal I didn't expect. I stood up, meeting his glare with equal force. We agreed to take Patrick down. What happened after was never part of the deal. You don't get a say in what I do now. Matt let out a bitter laugh. Wow, but you really outdid yourself, Donald. Patrick's coming for me. You think he's gonna leave you untouched? You want both sides? You think you can have it all? The world doesn't work that way. That night, Patrick lay sprawled across my chest. He was too lazy to reach for the chips himself, so he dumped the bag in my hands and let me feed him. The projector played some cliché romance drama. He crunched on a chip and scoffed. Why don't these idiots just talk to each other? The whole movie wouldn't exist if they just cleared up the misunderstanding. I nodded absent-mindedly, mind still stuck on Matt's words. Would he tell Patrick? Would he expose everything? Patrick suddenly spoke. Unless. I flinched. The chips spilled everywhere. Patrick turned his head, narrowing his eyes. Boss, what's with the overreaction? He stared at me, deep black eyes drilling straight into my soul. When Patrick locked onto someone, it was like he could see through every little lie, every hidden thought. I wanted to say something, but even the simple act of opening my mouth felt impossibly heavy. After a long moment, I finally forced out, nothing. Everything was normal. Too normal. Matt wasn't the type to let things slide. So I tested the waters. Has your brother contacted you? Patrick's chewing slowed. His face twisted in instant disgust. Why would I bring him up? Bad luck. Relief flooded through me. For now, I was safe. I'd tell him. Eventually. I wasn't planning on keeping this from him forever. Not yet. Half a year passed just like that. Slowly, seamlessly. For a moment, I really thought things with Patrick could go on like this forever. Then, all at once, everything collapsed. An entire department resigned overnight. Investors who had already signed deals suddenly pulled out. Negative press flooded the internet like a well-orchestrated storm. Projects that were halfway through construction ground to a halt, forcing me to sell them off at a loss. I was drowning in work, barely keeping my head above water. And, like sharks circling blood in the water, the old men on the board called an emergency meeting. They wanted to re-evaluate whether I was truly fit to be CEO. I laughed at the irony. Funny how no one had a word to say when I was making them money. But now, with the first sign of trouble, they were sharpening their knives. The timing was too precise, too clean. Like someone was pulling strings behind the scenes. Then one day I went to a rival firm to negotiate, and just as I stepped into the lobby, I saw Patrick walking out of their office. He met my gaze. Then just as quickly he looked away. Like all the warmth between us had been a fever dream, one I had woken up from too late. My chest tightened, and for a second, I wasn't sure if it was the alcohol or something worse. I grabbed his wrist. We need to talk. Patrick wrenched free with a sharp laugh. There's nothing left to talk about, Donald. He held himself back for a second. Then suddenly he snapped. His fist crashed into my face. I fucking trusted you. The force of it knocked me sideways. Through the blur of pain, I caught a glimpse of his red-rimmed eyes. I didn't let go. Didn't even wipe the blood off my lip. I just repeated, let's talk. Patrick exhaled sharply, voice trembling with fury. You'd better have an excuse that I can actually accept. We didn't get the chance. Because my father called me back home. The moment I stepped into his office, a glass ashtray came flying at my head. I didn't move. It shattered against my temple with a dull crack. Blood trickled down my face. A sharp, splitting pain. It almost felt familiar. Like what Patrick must have felt the day I first crushed him. I lifted my gaze to meet my father's. He was old now. Sick. Not much time left. He pointed a shaking finger at me, struggling to breathe between his anger. Ruined the company over some damn relationship. His voice shook. If I had known, I would have strangled you in the crib. I dusted the blood from my shirt and smiled. Well, you didn't. And if it weren't for me, this company would have been buried years ago. I leaned against his desk, tilting my head. So, what's your plan? That bastard son of yours who's going to drop dead in some woman's bed? Or your daughter, who left the country and dumped all her mess on you? I chuckled. You're losing your mind, old man. His hand trembled violently, lips moving, but no words came out. I smiled coldly. You should take your meds. I returned home to an empty house. Flipped the light switch. The sudden brightness stung my eyes, sharp enough to make them water. Pat was gone. They'd taken everything, his bed, his toys. Nothing left behind. A beautiful woman was in front of me, sexy, willing. But I felt nothing. I almost laughed. I had gone in with the intent to humiliate Patrick. And now? Now I was completely bent. Even worse, I was useless. I waved her off, and as she walked out, she sneered, "You look rich, but what a disappointment." Funny. Patrick had said something similar once. And it turned out to be true. Not only was I bent, I was fucking useless. Fixing things wasn't impossible. Patrick hadn't completely destroyed me. A subsidiary took the fall, filing for bankruptcy. Meanwhile, I pulled the best talent into the main company, boosted PR, and manipulated the market sentiment. The stocks rebounded within days. When I finally looked at my reflection, I barely recognized myself. Unshaven. Bloodshot eyes. Muscles untrained, shoulders thinner. Would Patrick be disappointed? I braced my hands against the sink, exhaling slowly. How the hell did it come to this? I had spent 27 years in control. And twice, both times, it was Patrick who had completely unraveled me. Revenge was too costly. Because this time, I had lost myself in the process. At least he hadn't blocked my number. The call rang for 3 seconds before it connected. Patrick answered, breathless. "Donald." My blood surged, chest tightening. I forced my voice to stay even. "Patrick, what are you doing?" Patrick laughed breathlessly. "What does it matter? Who I'm fucking isn't any of your business." Then, right before the line cut off, I heard it. A young man's voice, muffled. "Pa." Like a fucking explosion in my ears. Before I knew it, I was already outside Patrick's apartment. He opened the door, eyes widening in shock. "Donald? How the hell did you find me?" I stared at him. At the wide-open bathrobe barely covering his pale skin. At the marks scattered across his body. A sharp, slicing pain carved through my chest. "You..." My throat tightened. "You slept with your brother?" Patrick blinked. Then, his expression twisted in pure disbelief. "The fuck?" I swallowed hard, voice cracking. "You can't, you shouldn't, even if he's adopted, that's still..." My words tangled. My emotions were a wreck. Patrick watched me. Then, in the most exaggerated, exasperated motion, he rolled his eyes. "You absolute fucking dumbass." He pointed at my neck. "You did that yourself. Don't recognize your own damn bite marks." I swallowed back the tears that had been on the verge of falling. Took another good look. And yeah, the marks were definitely my doing. Patrick reached for the door, about to shut it in my face. Panic flared, and I caught the door handle, forcing it open. "Come home with me." He crossed his arms and leaned against the doorframe, watching me like I was something amusing. "Guess I didn't teach you a hard enough lesson? Still got the time to talk about love?" I nodded immediately. At that moment, Pat came bounding out from behind Patrick, rubbing against my leg. I scooped him up and held him out, shamelessly playing my best card. "Look, Pat misses his dad." Patrick huffed but finally relented, stepping aside to let me in. Just like that, the roles were reversed. I had become a glorified housekeeper in Patrick's home. He leaned lazily against my stomach, arms crossed as I stood behind him, obediently blow-drying his hair. I'd done it plenty of times before. But this time, it felt different. Maybe because I was better at it now. My fingers slipped through the strands, soft and familiar, and I had the sudden urge to lean down and kiss him. A slap landed across my face. "Back off." I blinked, stunned, feeling the heat on my cheek. A little aggrieved, I took a step back. "Patrick, you're so stingy." He refused to take the money I transferred to his account. In fact, it only seemed to piss him off more. "Oh, what? Trying to keep me as your sugar baby?" I opened my mouth. "That's not what I meant." But I couldn't hold it back anymore. "Can we ever go back?" Patrick lifted his gaze, staring at me with an unreadable expression. Then, his lips curled in a cold smirk. "Donald, let me correct you on something. We were never together. Not once." A sharp, slicing pain spread through my chest. His words cut deep, peeling me open inch by inch. I exhaled slowly. "Fine, Donald. You deserve this. You deserve every last bit of this." I was practically skipping my way home after grocery shopping. Peter watched me, looking like he was witnessing a rare species in the wild. Donald, what the hell have you become? I shrugged. Shut up. Patrick wants ribs. I gotta hurry. But when I got home, there was an unexpected guest. He was sitting comfortably on the couch, casually calling Patrick brother. Patrick, for his part, was laughing, his eyes curved in amusement. That disgust, that irritation, gone. He didn't look at Matt with the same contempt he'd shown me these past few days. A contrast so sharp, it made my stomach twist. So I was the only fool who had lost everything: pride, dignity, self-respect. I suddenly remembered Patrick's drunken voice, calling Schauscher that night. And honestly, I felt petty. Is that what you like? The thought soured my mood. I silently finished cooking. Matt was still there. I finally snapped, my voice sharp. Why are you still here? Matt didn't even blink. I'm at my brother's house. Shouldn't you be the one leaving? I turned to Patrick, waiting for him to kick this uninvited guest out. Instead, he smiled. Sit down. Let's eat together. Matt picked up a rib and deliberately took a bite, eyes glinting with provocation. Didn't know you could cook, Donald. I clenched my jaw and ignored him. I reached over and put some food in Patrick's bowl. He didn't reject it. But he didn't acknowledge it either. Just kept chatting with Matt. In the end, the food I gave him remained untouched. My eyes burned. I put down my chopsticks. I left. Waited 30 minutes. Patrick never texted. Never called. Good thing I had taken Pat with me. I scratched behind his ears, whispering, "Your dad abandoned us. Guess it's just you and me now." Pat licked his paw, glanced at me, and sneered. I swear. The damn cat sneered. Then Patrick called. I picked up immediately, hopeful, only to be met with an absolute storm of curses. Donald, where the fuck is my son? My throat tightened. Oh, he's your son now? Not mine. If you want him, come get him. He hung up. I turned to Pat, smothering him in kisses. You genius, you beautiful, beautiful child. That night, I rummaged through my closet. Pulled out the maid outfit I had bought on a whim. Been working out lately. My chest was bigger. Patrick would probably like it. The door flew open. Patrick didn't even look at me before demanding, "Where's my son?" Then his words died. His gaze flicked downward, taking in the tight fabric. The way the buttons at the chest strained, two already having popped open. His eyes narrowed. Donald, are you trying to seduce me? I tugged at the hem, suddenly feeling self-conscious. Yes. I'm trying to seduce you. I closed my eyes and exhaled. They say happiness comes in threes. Patrick, here's your 3. Patrick fell for it. He left marks all over me, like he was trying to claim something. Afterward, he lay back against the pillows, lighting a cigarette. He looked pleased. Satisfied. And then, Donald, let's just be fuck buddies. I blinked. You're good at it after all. The room spun. The bruises, the scratches, the way he had moaned my name moments ago. And now he wanted to reduce us to this? He was pulling up his pants, ready to leave. I stared at him. At the man who had completely ruined me. I heard my own voice. Flat. Emotionless. Okay. I had a long, long moment of self-reflection. And the conclusion? I was a fucking simp. Peter laughed so hard he had to hold his stomach. Donald, you're not a simp. You're a fuck buddy. Occasionally, Patrick would be in the mood and call me over. A rare privilege. He even let me stay the night sometimes. Which, in Patrick's world, was progress. That night, I stood in his kitchen, humming as I stirred a pot of sweet lotus red bean soup. The storm outside rumbled, thunder rolling through the sky. A loud crack. Everything suddenly went black. For 3 seconds, I stood frozen in place. Then, panic set in. I rushed to turn off the stove, barely sparing a second to grab my coat before bolting out the door. Patrick was scared of the dark. Terrified of it. He never admitted it, but every night when he waited for me to come home, the lights in the living room were always left on. Even in bed, he curled up against me, seeking warmth, seeking comfort. That was when I was there. But if he was alone now, if the power had gone out, I didn't even want to imagine how scared he must be. The rain was relentless, turning the city into a blur of silver mist. I could barely see the road ahead. Halfway there, my car sputtered, then died. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel in frustration, but it didn't change anything. So I abandoned it and ran the rest of the way. Cold rain pelted my skin, drenching me in seconds. I kept calling the same number over and over. Sorry, the number you dialed is currently unavailable. Please try again later. I hung up, dialed again. The rain had risen to my calves, soaking my shoes. By the time I reached Patrick's place, I was pounding on the door, my voice hoarse. Patrick, are you home? Open the door. No answer. I braced my foot, ready to kick it down. Then, suddenly, the door swung open. Patrick stood there, perfectly fine. Dressed in his usual loungewear, face slightly flushed, house lit up bright and warm. Like nothing was wrong. He took one look at me and burst into laughter. Donald, did you get into a car accident? Why do you look like this? I stared at him, dazed. Then, with shaking hands, I pulled him into my arms. You're okay, I whispered. You're okay. Patrick was warm. Solid. And only after I confirmed for myself that he was truly safe did my heart finally return to its rightful place. Pain pricked at my foot. I looked down, finally realizing just how much of a mess I was. Drenched, bruised, breathless. I probably looked like a maniac. Patrick handed me the first aid kit, his expression unreadable. So, let me get this straight. You thought I'd be in danger, so you panicked, ran here in the middle of a storm, and abandoned your car on the street? It's already being towed, by the way. He paused for 2 seconds, then frowned. But more importantly, did you even stop to think about your safety? His voice was firm, but his hands were gentle as he helped me clean my wounds. I was quiet for a long moment. Why hadn't I thought about myself? Maybe you're more important. A silence stretched between us. Then fingers ruffled through my hair, like someone petting a cat. Patrick's voice wavered slightly. I used to think you were made of stone. But turns out, you're just an idiot. I huffed, feeling oddly wronged. An idiot is an idiot. Stone. Something clicked. I snapped my head up, gripping his shoulders. Patrick, do you call me stone in your head? Patrick averted his gaze immediately. No. Liar. That reaction was way too suspicious. I shook him, lowering my voice carefully. Patrick, do you like me? This time, he didn't look away. He met my eyes, unwavering. Then slowly, he nodded. Yeah. Fireworks went off in my brain. My chest ached, my throat tightened. I buried my face into his shoulder and started crying. Thank God, I choked. Thank God. Patrick sighed, resigned. So now you get why I was so angry when I found out you lied to me? But I'm not mad anymore. I lifted my head, blinking through tears. Why? Patrick smiled faintly. Because you like me too. Much later, we were lying in bed when I brought up Matt. Patrick smirked. But, do you hate him that much? I gritted my teeth. Of course. Patrick stretched lazily. I sent him back. I sat up. Back where? He turned over, yawning. Where else? Back to his actual parents. My dad wasn't that senile. Why would he let an adopted son fight me for my inheritance? That'd be insane. I blinked, slowly processing the words. But Patrick had a good relationship with his family. His sudden bankruptcy had never made sense. His father wouldn't have just stood by and let it happen. I turned back to him. Patrick met my gaze. Then, with a mischievous glint in his eyes, he whispered, "Sure."
Thanks for stopping by. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any new videos.